she collapsed in blood. Right there in the corridor, trembling, white as a sheet, dress stained red. And when the royal guard reached her, when he knelt to ask what happened, she didn't say, "Help." She said his name. Thomas. Said not to tell. That's all it took. One name. One unconscious child. One trail of blood that couldn't be explained. And within minutes, Windsor Castle was in lockdown. Because when a 10-year-old girl collapses bleeding and whispers the name of Camilla's adult son, there's no such thing as overreacting. What happened next forced the Crown to confront what no one wanted to believe, until the truth finally came out. And by then, it was already too late to take it back. Before we show you what the guard did when he realised no one else had heard her cry, "Ye pookie," how Catherine and William responded when she learned who her daughter named, and how Camilla reacted when the word shame was used in her defence, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, tap like, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell icon, because this one will make you question everything you thought you knew about what really happened behind that door. The West Garden wing of Windsor Castle had gone still for the evening. There were no visiting dignitaries, no rehearsals or charity walkthroughs, just quiet halls polished to a mirror sheen, sun-dipped stone archways, and a faint perfume of rose bushes caught on the breeze. Sergeant Evander Price preferred it that way. 36, Coldstream Guard, second rotation from the Afghanistan line, and selected for inner palace duty, not because he talked much, but because he didn't. That silence had earned him the corridor between the West Gallery and the back gardens, where Princess Charlotte sometimes walked between family quarters and her quiet reading alcove. He'd seen her pass before, usually with a small book or a biscuit half hidden in her palm. Never a scene, never a sound. But today something was wrong. She was alone, moving slowly. Evander's gaze sharpened as she approached, not hurriedly but unevenly. Arms crossed in front of her stomach, her white spring dress unusually wrinkled near the hem. Her hair was brushed, but slightly dishevelled near the temple. Her gait told him more than her expression did, tension in her steps, a forward lean like someone bracing against a tide. He took one step forward. "Ma'am?" "I'm fine," Charlotte interrupted, forcing a smile. Her voice wobbled at the edge. "I just need to—" But she didn't finish. She took 2 more steps, then stumbled. Not a theatrical faint. A child's body folding in on itself with no drama, no warning. She caught herself against the cold stone wall, breathing hard through her teeth. Her small frame slid lower, knees hitting the edge of the marble skirting. "Princess!" Evander dropped to a crouch beside her. I don't feel right," she whispered. He didn't touch her. Not without permission, but his eyes scanned fast, pulse line at her neck, colour of her lips, tension in her fingers. She was pale, shivering slightly, the sleeves of her dress pulled tight against her arms. Then he saw it, a dark line along the inner hem of her dress, a stain already setting into the fabric. Then another, just beneath her knees, pooling on the pale marble. Blood. Charlotte looked down, saw it too, and her whole body jerked like a wire had snapped inside. I didn't do anything wrong," she gasped. Her breath started to hitch, her hands trembling as they tried to fold her dress in tighter. "Please don't tell. He said not to—" Evander leaned in. "Who said?" Charlotte's eyes filled. She blurted it in a voice barely above air. "Thomas saw. He said not to say anything." Price froze. The name hit harder than any scream. He pressed his earpiece. "Medical runner now. Code amber. Child down. West Gallery Hall 7. Prepare lift." Charlotte's chest was heaving now, crying not from pain, but from some mix of fear and shame that had no place in a child's face. Evander knelt lower, voice steady. "You're safe, ma'am. You're safe. Stay with me." She nodded faintly, but her eyes were already starting to flutter. and the blood on the floor was no longer just hers. It was about to stain everything. Charlotte's collapse hadn't echoed. The West Gallery's rugs were too thick for sound to travel, but the silence afterward rang louder than any alarm. Evander Price kept one knee to the floor, bracing his body so she wouldn't fall sideways. Her breathing came in short, fast bursts, each one thinner than the last. She clutched at the fabric of her dress as though she could hold herself together by force. "Princess, can you hear me?" he said, voice low. She nodded, barely, then winced again, squeezing her eyes shut. A small pained sound escaped her throat. Evander scanned her quickly, trained instincts firing. No visible trauma to the head, no lacerations, no defensive wounds, but the blood was spreading, enough to alarm anyone, and far too much for a child who didn't understand what was happening. "Did you fall?" he asked. She shook her head. "Did someone push you? Did someone touch?" "No," she cried, voice breaking. I don't know. It just—" Her breathing stuttered. "Please don't let anyone see. Please don't let him know I said anything." Evander's jaw tightened. "Him who?" She lifted her head, only enough for her hair to slip aside, revealing wide eyes streaked with tears. "Thomas," she whispered. "He said it's dirty. He said girls who bleed should hide it. Don't let anyone know. He said—" Her breath hitched again. "Please don't tell him I told." Evander's pulse thudded. Not assault, no evidence suggesting physical harm, but fear. A child terrified of a natural biological process because of something an adult had said. That alone could shatter a safeguarding report. A staff aide rounded the corner at that moment, startled by the scene. "Sergeant, is that blood? What happened?" Evander raised a hand sharply. "Clear the hall, now!" More footsteps approached as whispers spread. "Did she fall? Is she hurt? Is someone else here?" His voice cut through it all. "No assumptions. Medical first. Privacy first." He radioed again, firmer this time. "Medical runner, increase pace, code amber, priority. Child losing consciousness." Charlotte's body suddenly sagged sideways, her arms dropping. Evander caught her carefully, mindful not to startle her as she slipped into his grip. "Princess Charlotte," he called softly. No response. She slumped fully into his arm, her head resting against his shoulder. Training took over. He swept one arm beneath her knees and lifted, not in panic, but with precise battlefield steadiness. Her small fingers twitched once, then fell still. A nearby staff member gasped. "Oh my God! Did someone hurt her?" Evander tightened his hold. "No," he said. "And until a doctor confirms it, no one repeats that question aloud." He stepped into motion, moving swiftly down the corridor toward the emergency stairwell. "She's going to be all right," he murmured, not to reassure others, but to anchor Charlotte's small, unconscious form against his chest. But inside, his mind was already racing through the protocols, through the name she had spoken, through the terror in her voice. Thomas, and the bleeding child who thought she had done something wrong. The doors to the emergency medical wing opened before he touched them. Dr. Worsley, the on-call palace physician, had received the code amber 10 seconds prior and was already donning gloves as Sergeant Price stepped through with Charlotte limp in his arms. "Room 2, Worsley ordered. "Clear a cot, female nurse only." Evander placed her gently onto the padded surface, her dress now damp with sweat and blood. Her head lolled to one side before her lashes fluttered, then opened. She blinked in slow, disoriented pulses. "Where's Mummy?" she whispered. "She's on her way," Evander said. Her lip quivered, eyes starting to fill again. "I didn't want anyone to see." A nurse pulled the privacy curtain around them. Evander stepped back without being asked, but not far. Dr. Worsley leaned in, his tone a blend of medical detachment and gentle understanding. "Princess Charlotte," he said softly, "you're going to be all right. This is something every woman experiences. It's your first time, isn't it?" Charlotte turned her face away, tears slipping into her hairline. She gave a tiny nod. "She didn't fall," Evander told him from outside the curtain. "There were no signs of trauma." Dr. Worsley gave a small confirming hum as he examined her. "No," he said after a moment, voice even. "She didn't fall. She had a physiological response to the onset of menstruation, compounded by dehydration, likely heat stress, and what I would medically classify as panic." He lowered his voice. "There's no indication of assault, no external injuries, but she was terrified." Evander exhaled for the first time in minutes, but the relief didn't last. "Dr. C." Worsley straightened, now glancing toward him with an expression far more serious. "She mentioned someone just before she passed out." Evander nodded. "Yes, sir. She said the name Thomas." Worsley's face tightened, not in confusion, but recognition. "Thomas Parker Bowles." She didn't give the surname, but she said he told her bleeding is dirty, that she should hide it, that it would make people not love her anymore. The physician didn't speak for a moment. Then, emotional contamination of a first biological episode, especially when linked to fear or shame, can shape a child's perception of their body for years. Evander's eyes narrowed. "Is that enough to escalate?" "It's enough to file," Worsley said bluntly. "If her distress was induced by an adult framing menstruation as moral filth, then yes, it qualifies as a safeguarding breach." The nurse reappeared, pulling the curtain slightly open. Charlotte was sitting upright now, wrapped in a fresh blanket, eyes red but steady. Evander lowered his head briefly. "You did the right thing speaking up, ma'am." Charlotte just shook her head. "I didn't want to get him in trouble." Worsley turned to Evander. "File your safeguarding note. I'll initiate the formal chain." And in that moment, something shifted, because while Charlotte's bleeding was no longer a mystery, her fear was. The hallway outside the medical wing was quiet until the sound of quick, unhesitating footsteps broke it. Catherine rounded the corner faster than anyone had seen her move in months. No heels, no ceremony, just flats, a simple navy coat thrown over what looked like a rushed change from loungewear, and the sharp breath of a mother sprinting on fear alone. When she reached the doorway, she didn't knock. She didn't pause. She entered and froze. Charlotte was seated on the edge of the cot, wrapped in a soft white blanket, ankles tucked beneath her, eyes hollow from crying. Her cheeks were streaked, her fingers tight around the blanket's edges, like she was trying to hold herself together. "Mummy," she whispered, "I'm sorry." Catherine crossed the space in 2 strides and dropped to her knees beside the cot. "No, no, sweetheart," she said, her voice already trembling. "Don't say that. There's nothing to be sorry for." Charlotte didn't stop crying. She couldn't. Her arms folded over her stomach again, the same defensive posture that had made Evander pause earlier. "I didn't mean to bleed. I didn't know it could just start. It got on the floor, on the tiles. He said that makes people not love you, that you're supposed to be clean." Catherine stilled. Charlotte continued, voice cracking. "He said I should wash it fast and never speak of it, that boys hate it, that it ruins dresses and makes you less girl." Catherine reached forward and gently touched her daughter's face. "Who said that, darling?" Charlotte hesitated, then whispered, "Thomas." Catherine's hand stopped. Evander, who had been standing silently just beyond the curtain, shifted his stance instinctively, one small move that said more than words ever could. Catherine didn't shout, didn't recoil. She placed her hand over Charlotte's, steadying it, then stood. She turned to the attending physician, her voice now so tightly wound it sounded like piano wire. "Did she say his name when she arrived?" "Yes, ma'am," Dr. Worsley answered, "and Sergeant Price heard it prior in the corridor. Her distress was evident even before she collapsed." Catherine looked to the guard. "Sergeant?" Evander nodded, his voice flat and precise. "I heard the name Thomas. She said he told her not to say anything, that it was dirty, that it would make people leave her." Catherine's throat bobbed. Charlotte, behind her, whimpered again. "Please don't tell him I told—" Catherine turned back, crouched again, and looked her daughter in the eyes. "You did nothing wrong, nothing." But the fire in her expression was unmistakable now, because someone had made her daughter ashamed of being human, and that someone, she, was about to be held accountable. The second wave of footsteps was heavier, measured, deliberate, unmistakably royal. Prince William entered, with 2 aides trailing, but neither of them kept up as he crossed the threshold of the medical wing and locked eyes with Catherine. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Charlotte, still sitting on the cot, turned her face toward her father, blinking hard. William crossed the room slowly, carefully. When he reached her, he knelt, not as the Prince of Wales, not as a public figure, but as a father seeing his daughter pale, blanketed, and scared. He placed one hand on the edge of the cot and met her eyes gently. "Sweetheart," he said, voice low, "are you all right?" Charlotte nodded a little, then hesitated. Her mouth moved like she wanted to speak, but couldn't. So William shifted, flattening his voice into yes or no questions, the way Catherine had once done for George after a cycling fall left him too embarrassed to speak. "Did Thomas tell you to hide this?" A small nod. "Did he say it was dirty?" Another nod, this time shakier. "Did he make you feel ashamed?" Charlotte looked down, then slowly, "Yes." William closed his eyes for half a second. Not long, just enough to gather every shard of his self-control and sharpen it into something usable. He stood and faced Catherine. She leaned in and gave him a quiet, urgent summary, what Evander had heard, what Charlotte had said, what the physician confirmed. When she was done, William turned to Dr. Worsley. "Is there any evidence of injury?" "No, sir," Worsley said. "The bleeding was natural, first menstrual onset. The collapse was from pain, panic, and shame. There is no assault, but there is emotional harm, induced by fear." William nodded once, jaw tight. He turned to Evander. "Sergeant, your conduct?" Evander responded calmly. "I did not touch her until she lost consciousness. I maintained verbal check-ins. The name Thomas was heard before collapse. Emotional panic was evident. I initiated Code Amber. No protocol was breached." William's shoulders straightened further. He looked to the nearest aide. "Find Senior Safeguarding Officer Wells. Quietly. No public alert. Tell her this is a Level 2 emotional protection event." The aide disappeared immediately. Catherine crossed her arms tightly. "You're going to isolate him?" William didn't look at her. He looked toward the door. "I'm going to contain him." Then, quieter. "If a grown man made a 10-year-old girl afraid of her own body, in this palace, it's not a misunderstanding. It's a failure." He turned back toward his daughter, whose eyes were still tracking him through the haze. And for the second time in 15 minutes, the most powerful man in the building knelt before the smallest. "Nothing about you is dirty," he said, barely above a whisper. Charlotte's lip quivered, but she nodded. And that was enough for now. The door to the medical wing burst open without a knock. "Where is she?" Camilla barked. Her voice cut across the air like a blade. She was dressed hastily. Long grey cardigan over an ivory silk blouse. Hair swept into a half-secure knot, fury radiating from her like heat off pavement. William turned first, his body shifting into the space as a shield. Camilla barely registered it. She spotted Charlotte across the room, blanketed, pale, sitting quietly on the cot with Catherine's arm wrapped around her shoulder. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Camilla snapped. "What is this nonsense now?" No one answered. She stepped forward, tone turning falsely maternal. "Sweetheart, really? Your first period? That's all this is, isn't it? Girls are dramatic, but this, you've caused half the palace to panic." Charlotte stiffened. She didn't look up. Catherine's eyes sharpened. "Camilla," she said quietly, "please stop." But Camilla pressed forward, waving her hand toward the physician's tray. "Medical beds, blood collection bags, a lockdown corridor? What are we doing here, hosting a Victorian novel?" William's jaw ticked once. Charlotte whimpered. Camilla turned toward her again with a sigh. "It's natural. Girls bleed. You clean it up and carry on. not cry and faint and make a scene. Then she made the mistake. She turned to William and said with complete certainty, "Thomas only told her the truth. Girls should handle these things discreetly. She'll learn." The room went still. Catherine slowly stood. Her voice was icy, each syllable carved from control. "He told my daughter that bleeding makes people not love her, that it's something to be hidden, that it's disgusting." Camilla gave a shrug. "You know how children twist things. She's emotional." "She collapsed in blood and fear," Catherine said, louder now, "because your son told her her body made her unworthy of affection." "She's sensitive," Camilla barked. "She's always been too theatrical. She's 10. The words didn't come from Catherine, they came from William. His tone wasn't raised, but the sharpness in it silenced everything. "She's 10 years old. She experienced a terrifying biological change and was too ashamed to speak because of words your son spoke, and you're defending him." Camilla hesitated, lips parting, but she said nothing, because there was no good defense, only deflection, and the temperature in the room had shifted. William didn't step forward. He didn't need to. He turned to the physician and said simply, "Continue your documentation. We'll handle the rest." Camilla stood frozen for a moment, then turned sharply and left, without a single glance at Charlotte. The child exhaled as the door closed behind her, not because she was calm, but because, for the first time since it started, the person who made her feel small was finally being made smaller. The door opened again, this time without force. 2 palace safeguarding officers entered first, quiet and composed. Between them walked Thomas Parker Bowles, collar crooked, hair half-gelled, expression caught somewhere between confusion and irritation. "I don't understand what this is about," he said, already brushing his hands down his shirt. "I was told I needed to answer questions about Charlotte. Is she all right?" No one responded at first. Then William stepped forward, not with aggression, but with a presence that made the entire room constrict. "Thomas," he said evenly, "before you speak again, I need you to listen very carefully." Thomas glanced at the cot, saw Charlotte wrapped in a blanket, sitting silently beside Catherine, her eyes glassy and distant. He smiled uncomfortably. "What's this? Did she fall? Look, if she's hurt, I'm sure it's not serious. She's always had a flair for the dramatic." Catherine stood slowly. "You told a 10-year-old child," she said, "that bleeding makes her disgusting." Thomas blinked. "What? That's absurd." "She collapsed in the corridor," William said. "Afraid, alone, bleeding. She begged the guard not to tell anyone what you said." Thomas scoffed, trying to turn his reaction into charm. "Come on, I was trying to prepare her. Look, these things, they're embarrassing. I thought I was helping. My mother always said—" "Your mother," Catherine interrupted, "taught her shame, and you just passed it down." Thomas stepped toward the bed, raising his hand in some vague gesture of comfort, but Charlotte flinched. It wasn't big, just a tiny recoil, shoulders lifting, face turning to her mother. That single movement did more damage than any accusation. "I didn't mean—" Thomas started, flustered, but Charlotte's voice cracked through the tension. "He said, if I told anyone, no one would ever look at me the same." Thomas turned slowly. "What?" he said, caught off guard. "He said it ruins things," Charlotte whispered, "that men leave, that it's shameful. He said he saw a stain, and it made him feel sick." He laughed. The room dropped at 10 degrees. Thomas's mouth opened, but William beat him to it. "You made a child feel revulsion at her own body." Thomas backpedaled, trying to regain footing. "You're twisting this. I was joking. She took it wrong." Evander Price stepped into his path without a word when Thomas moved toward Charlotte again. "Stand down, Sergeant!" Camilla's voice rang from just outside the hall, echoing in protest, but William answered her without turning. "He will not move." Charlotte reached for her mother's hand, small fingers clenching tight, and for the first time since she'd spoken his name, she was no longer afraid of who heard it. The door opened one final time. Senior Safeguarding Officer Maura Wells stepped in. Clipboard in hand, expression unreadable, her navy blazer sharp against the stark white walls. She looked once at Charlotte, once at William, and then at Thomas. The verbal briefing was sufficient, she said. Emotional distress confirmed. Named adult instigator identified. Multiple witnesses. Immediate restriction protocol qualifies under Article 7. Thomas blinked. Restriction? For what? A bad choice of words? Mora didn't even look at him. Emotional harm to a minor, unintentional or not. Under Palace Code, that's enough for containment during investigation. Camilla's voice exploded from just outside the hall. You are not isolating my son over this! She appeared in the doorway again, wild-eyed, still panting from her march back up the corridor. Her heels echoed like gunfire as she stormed in, planting herself between the officers and Thomas. This is madness, she snapped. She bled, she panicked, and now we're going to destroy a man's reputation over an awkward conversation. Catherine didn't rise. She just looked at her daughter and whispered, Do you want him to stay here? Charlotte shook her head. Once, firmly. Camilla tried again. You're blowing this out of proportion. Thomas didn't hurt her. He didn't lay a finger on her. William turned to her. He didn't have to. Camilla threw her hands up. This is political. This is Catherine trying to humiliate me. No, Catherine replied, calm and cold. This is your son humiliating a child in private with words no child should have heard. And this is your refusal to care what they did to her. Mora gave a nod to the officers. Escort Mr. Parker Bowles to temporary isolation suite 3. No communication devices, no family contact. 36-hour holding pending formal review. Thomas's face twisted. You're detaining me over this? Over what? Feelings? You made her feel like a curse, William said, voice brittle. You told a little girl that a part of growing up made her less lovable. Thomas turned to Camilla, desperate now. Mother. But Camilla had no words left, just breath and regret, and a room no longer on her side to Michontas. Catherine stood slowly and said it so softly that only those closest could hear. My daughter collapsed in blood and silence, not because of biology, but because of fear. And you're angry about consequences. That was it. The officers stepped forward. Thomas didn't resist, not out of understanding, but because his leverage had evaporated. He looked at Charlotte one last time. She didn't look back. She just leaned into her mother's arms. And the room let her. The hallway outside the Royal Medical Wing had grown quiet again. Inside, nurses dimmed the lights. The physician had finished the final checks. Charlotte was resting on a low medical cot, head turned toward the wall, her breathing calm now. But the tension in the air hadn't lifted. Sergeant Evander Price hadn't moved from his spot outside the door. He didn't speak. Didn't shift his weight. Didn't break posture. He simply stood. In full dress uniform, blood still faintly visible near the hem of his right sleeve, where he had carried her. The door opened. Catherine stepped out, hair tied back now, face washed, but her eyes still red-rimmed with exhaustion and fury not yet spent. She didn't speak at first, just looked at him. Then, softly, Thank you. Evander dipped his head. Ma'am. You didn't assume the worst, she added, arms folding across her chest. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't panic. You just caught her. He didn't respond with words, but the tilt of his chin said what mattered. That was the job. William approached a moment later, more composed now, but still wearing the kind of solemnity that doesn't leave easily. He looked to Evander and gave a formal nod, the kind usually reserved for ceremony. Sergeant Price, he said, your conduct was exemplary. You followed instinct with precision, guarded her dignity in a vulnerable moment, and escalated appropriately without delay. I'll include full documentation in my final note, sir, Evander replied, tone level. You won't need to, William said quietly. The only documentation that matters is what Charlotte remembers. And she'll remember you were the first person who didn't make her feel small. Evander glanced toward the door, just as it opened again. Charlotte stood there, blanket still wrapped tight around her shoulders, feet bare against the polished floor. She looked up at him, still pale but steadier than she had been all day. Her voice was soft. "Thank you for catching me." Evander bowed his head, not deeply, just enough. She didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. She turned and slipped back inside, the blanket trailing behind her, like the last shadow of fear finally leaving the hallway. Catherine watched her go, then turned to the guard once more. "You didn't wait for anyone else to help," she said, "and because of that, she wasn't alone when it started." Evander didn't reply, but he didn't move either, because she wasn't safe yet, and he had no intention of leaving until she was. The sky above Windsor had just begun to turn, that soft, in-between colour when the stars vanish, but the sun hasn't yet risen. Inside the palace, everything had gone still. Not the kind of stillness that follows sleep, but the stillness that follows reckoning. Charlotte had been moved to a private recovery suite at the far end of the medical wing. A familiar room, warm, softly lit, the same one used when she'd once broken her wrist falling from a pony. But this time, there was no cast, no visible bruise, only quiet and breath, and a girl trying to understand what had just happened to her. Sergeant Evander Price hadn't left the corridor outside her door, not since the beginning, not when the physicians changed shifts, not when the aides offered to relieve him, not when Camilla passed again, she this time in silence, on her way to be escorted to her own restricted suite under order. He stood where he had been the whole time, boots on polished stone, posture level, rifle slung but untouched. Some staff passed with gentler steps now, not out of fear but out of respect. The palace had heard the story, and even those who hadn't seen it knew. The guard who didn't wait, the child who had whispered the wrong name at the right time, the truth that had undone a wall of silence. The door creaked softly. Catherine stepped out once again, this time wrapped in her full overcoat, hair neatly swept, but eyes still carrying the weight of the night. She didn't say anything immediately. She just looked at Evander, and gave the kind of nod that didn't come from a princess, but from a mother who would remember a single act for the rest of her life. He returned it, without words, without break in form. Then, from behind her, Charlotte, wrapped in the same navy blanket, face clearer now, hair brushed back from her forehead. Her slippers barely made a sound against the marble as she stepped forward. She looked up at her mother, then at the man still guarding her door. "Mummy," she said softly, "does bleeding really mean something bad?" Catherine crouched next to her. Her voice was low. "No, darling, it means you're growing, that you're strong, and that you are safe now." Charlotte looked toward Evander. He didn't move, didn't speak, but the stillness he stood in, after everything, said everything. She gave the faintest nod, then turned back inside. The door closed gently, and Sergeant Evander Price stood post. Not because someone ordered him to, but because some knights, some children, deserve to see a man still standing when it's finally over. Do you think Thomas was out of line for shaming a child about something natural? Should Camilla have defended him after hearing what Charlotte said? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read everyone. Tap like, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a Royal Guard story. Share this video with someone who believes dignity should always come before shame. Watch one of the videos now on your screen, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, with a brand new story.